back to this and the printed circuit. I have a printed circuit, and I'm going to show you just so you can see what that's about if you don't know. This is the printed circuit on the back of the dash, and this little harness here would clip in just like that. So to release it, you would squeeze the two tabs and pull it. You have to wiggle it a little bit, it's tight in there. And so looking at this, you can see that it's got all these little veins that come out, and they send the signal when you perform a function. So when you want to see the indicator, you hit the indicator, and then the light bulbs will flash, letting you know. See, these are just light bulb that's in there for whatever position that indicator is in. So let's flip it over. This dash actually came out of a 1967 C-10. Keep in mind, my wiring harness is being used out of a 72 C-10. So there was no AM meter, no water temperature, no oil pressure, or anything like that down here below. All it had was generator, oil pressure, and then the two-turn signal indicator. And that was it. The fuel, and your speedometer. So this was just for demonstration purposes so that you could see that printed dash. And then I noticed that some of you might have noticed that there's these switches here. So people had wired in their own lights and things like that. The ignition switch. This is what the ignition switch would look like intact and outside of the vehicle. So when you get around here to the back side where the harness connection is, you have first the pink, a tan, a red, purple, brown, and then a thin brown with white striped wire tagged in with that. So when you follow this all the way around, all the way up and back through, it will end up right down here inside our fuse box. So these are the wires that come from outside of the ignition into our fuse box. The next cluster of wires that we're looking at belong to the heater. So you have this control. This was attached to the backside of the heater control switch. This went out to the blower motor, and then this connection here went to a resistor that was attached to the top of the heater box on the inside of the vehicle. Most rat rods do not run heat, but for people who are interested in how to wire their aftermarket heater box, that are interested in having heat in the vehicle, this is the way you would do it. You would come up to this harness connection that was attached to the heater control switch, the off and on, and then you would trace that brown wire back, and then you would come into our fuse box, and that brown wire will lead you right here. So then when you flip this over and you look at the fuse box panel, you see air condition, heat, and that's where the fuse would go. So aftermarket heaters come with a switch that need to be wired for the power, and then from the switch that power would go over to the aftermarket heater box and perform the high speed, low speed, and turn it on and off. So in order to do that, you're going to want to take this brown wire, and this is what you would wire to the switch on your aftermarket heater box. The rest of the wires you can delete because you no longer need them. I run my vehicle in all weather conditions, so having a heater box for the defrost and wipers is important to me. So the colors for the heater go as followed. You have a blue with an orange stripe. You have yellow, and you have a solid orange, and then you have the brown, which is once again the power source for your heater control. Now, since we just mentioned the wipers, this is the last circuit in our fuse box analyzation of the controls. So here you go. It's the wiper switch. And coming out from the wiper switch, you have a light blue, you have a dark blue, you have a black, and then up here, these wires follow. Then you have yellow tagging in to this little harness here, the light blue and the yellow. And then this harness here has a dark blue with the yellow. And then the black, as you see, it has its own little connector. So on the wiper motor, this would be the ground, this is the power, and this is the windshield wiper pump energy source. So again, most rat rods don't run wipers. I do, and I'm interested in the wiper power. So when you buy an aftermarket wiper, it comes with instructions and it tells you to wire into a power source and to have it ground. It also comes with a switch so that you can have your functions. So the only wire that you're going to need out of this, if you're using this wiring harness to retrofit in something other than a 72 Chevy pickup truck, is this yellow wire here. This is the power feed for the wipers. And again, you follow the wire, trace it all the way back, and it would lead all the way up into our fuse box. So get this main wire out, you're good to go. The functions that run from the top of our fuse box, we had the light switch, we had this U-shaped connector that has the opposing U-shaped connection. It comes off of the steering column, and these are your steering column controls. So when you hit the signal to turn left, it sends the signal out to the lights outside on the fender to flash. Next, we had the printed circuit harness, and this is the gauge functions and also your indicator functions. So again, when you hit the turn signal to turn left, it's going to flash green. The little green arrow is going to flash in your dash cluster. Also connected to that was this ground wire. This has to be attached to the dash. It's grounding these components. We have the ignition switch, which we all know what this is for. We had this cluster of wires, the yellow, the greens. This is for your tail light function. We have the orange, blue, and yellow. This is for the heater control. And the brown is actually the power source for the heater. We have the wiper switch. And if you remember, the yellow wire connected to this is actually the power wire for the wipers. So if you're just wanting power for wipers, the yellow wire running off of this switch is what will give you power to some wipers. That concludes the fuse box and all of the connections coming from the fuse box. Next, we're going to move on to the connections that are made from the outside of the firewall that come into this fuse box. Now, onto the outside connections that plug into the fuse box. This is what it would look like once you've removed it from the fuse box. For demonstration purposes, this is how it looks while it's connected. You would be looking at it like this, as this mass of wires that we are currently looking at is on the outside of the firewall of the pickup truck. Side by side, you can see that all the pins line up. Once that center lug is removed, these will simply slide apart. Pretty easy. It's kind of tough to do one-handed. There you go. And that will give us two halves of this wiring harness. And as you can see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pins on this side. So we're going to call this the short side. And on the other side, you have the corresponding wires. On this side, you can see that you have 3, 6, 10 pins. And then, of course, on the other side, you have the corresponding wires. We're going to get into these wires and what functions they perform. Before we begin with the journey on these wires, this is just comparison from one year to the other. So on the right, you have the outside wiring harness from a 1967 C-10. On the left, you have the wiring harness connection from a 1972 C-10. And on the 67, on the right, you see that there's green, brown, white, blue, and purple. And then when you look over here on the left for the C-10, you have the brown, the green, that dark wire that looks black, it's actually pink. And then you have a brown and white, and you have purple. So going back to the one on the right from the 67, that tan wire, that goes to the proportioning valve. So that way, if the master cylinder dumps fluid out of one reservoir or the other, or both, a pressure switch goes off and the light in the dash come on and say, hey, brake failure. So then you go to the white coated wire. That goes to the ignition coil. Okay. You look under there, you have a green wire. The green would be for your water temperature. The blue wire is for oil pressure, which is a dummy light. It wasn't a gauge in that truck, it was just a light that came on. And then the purple would go down to the starter solenoid. So when you go over here to the left, you have the tan wire, which again goes to the proportioning valve. That way when the master cylinder loses pressure, it sets off a dummy light that says brake. Then underneath that, you have a green wire, which goes to your temperature, goes to the cylinder head. And then the wire that looks black, but it's actually pink when you get down lower, that goes to the HEI distributor. And then the purple, that goes to the starter solenoid. And then this one here, this brown and white, it has a connection end on it. I don't know what that came from. So the one way for me to find out is to trace it down through the fuse box. And I will, and I'll see what that's connected to. And then I'll do some research to see exactly what that went to. It's kind of thrown me for a loop because this is the first time that I've ever seen this on a wiring harness. And see, it has a connection in there. So it went to something, but it's nothing that I'm gonna need, but I'm still wanting to know what that is. So this was just basically me doing a comparison of one truck year model to the next. You know, they're all the same, but then there's some differences. So I just want to outline that.